So you look at the wealth of Africa and you ask, have the people benefited? And the question is a decisive no. So the issue really is, it's not about fiddling with the status quo. The status quo is not working.
My next guest is Honorable Jay Naidoo, who is a former Minister of Reconstruction and Development Program and also Minister of Post, Telecommunications and Broadcasting in the government of President Nelson Mandela in South Africa, who served from 1994 to 1999. He currently serves on the board of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which is committed to building good governance in Africa. And he advises a number of international organizations, including the Broadband Commission of the International Telecommunications Union and UNESCO. He is a prominent and highly respected elder in our community, and we like to call him Tata Naidoo. Tata Naidoo, welcome to our podcast.
Wonderful to be with you, and especially to see young women from Africa doing this, and interviewing us and holding us to account.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is all ours. So, I would like to start talking about Ubuntu. You talk a lot about the profound philosophy of Ubuntu that we all share, which means I am because we are. Can you tell us your idea or your vision of how Ubuntu should influence how we think about leadership in Africa, about governance and sustainable development of African economies?
Well, there is an old proverb from Africa that says, if you want to go fast, you must go alone. But if you want to go far, you must go together. Now, if you understand that as the principles underlying the philosophy, the way of life of Ubuntu, then you will understand that intelligent cooperation is the only way in which we get results. So we are 54 countries in Africa. Most of these countries have been decided not by a process that is organic, but because there was a scramble for Africa. And the colonial masters sat in Berlin in 1884 and carved up Africa between themselves. So what we have as countries in Africa is not African. It's a colonial construct that has divided culture, people, tribes, geographies to suit the needs of colonialism and slavery. And that's how it continues to be in this world. That Africa is probably the richest continent in the world, and our resources, they fuel the global economy. You know, you look at it, 90% of platinum in the world, or 35% of uranium. You look at the gas, the oil, much of the gold that sits in Western vaults comes out of South Africa. So you look at the wealth of Africa and you ask, have the people benefited? And the question is a decisive no. If you look at oil and gas, what do we have? Is the Niger Delta, where big multinational oil companies came and they promised a better life to people. And today it's a disaster 70 years later. And now they want to go and they want to drill for oil in the Okavango and Kavango basin, which is the most pristine ecosystem of Southern Africa. And again, they're making promises. And so until we get away from the notion that we are 54 countries and come to the idea that we're one continent and we should have an African agenda that has no boundaries, no borders, no national elites that drive our development in a way that enriches a small elite amongst us. Until we deal with this issue of governance, and leadership and come to an African agenda, whoever comes into to Africa, whether it's the Chinese or the Indians or the Russians or the Europeans or the United States, they will manipulate that agenda to suit them. But if we were organized and had an African agenda, then we welcome the competition in a way that benefits African people. You know, if I was the Minister of Communications, as you said, Africa is probably the fastest growing telecommunications market in the world. Ask yourself, why don't we have a manufacturing facility that manufactures phones made in Africa or equipment made in Africa? We keep giving away our resources and it's sold back to us at a much higher prices in a way that keeps our people trapped in poverty. So Ubuntu is the notion of what is the intelligent cooperation we need to have that makes sure that the African dream of an Africa at peace with itself, the end of conflict, where we are not the epicenter of hunger in the world, where our children have a pathway of hope and opportunity, is all possible because the greatest resource we have is our people. And we are 1.3 billion people in Africa, and 60% are under 25. We have the youngest population in the world. So why are they running away from Africa? It's because governance has failed and our leaders have failed us to harness our resources in an ecological way, in a way that is in line with us not creating more chaos through exceeding our planetary boundaries, by placing Mother Earth at the center of everything we do. And if we do that, we would be a continent which is the cradle of humanity that helps heal not just ourselves, but heal the whole world from the divisions that today bedevil us and cause so much violence and exclusion and inequality and poverty in the world.
Absolutely. We are stuck with this colonial construct. But we are one continent, a diverse continent of people, landscape, cultures, economies. And like you rightly pointed, one of the things most of our African economies have in common is the enormous wealth that our continent holds. And yet our continent is famous for poverty. That is the one thing that we are known for. The average African is getting poorer. And like you say, we need to improve governance so that we can operate as a single continent, speaking with one voice and interacting with the world on that sort of level playing field. How do we make that happen? How do we transform the governance so that it can deliver the long-held promise that has so far eluded us?
Well, doing exactly what you're doing. It's the future of our continent lies not in my generation. So you as young people can't be leaders of tomorrow. You have to be leaders of today because time is running out. A lot of the big wars that we are seeing, the resource conflicts about the way in which our resources are being abused, way in which Africa is being recolonized, the way in which plundering in collusion with some of our people in government is now being used to recolonize our continent. And again, we are seeing a plundering. It was the point where we had ethical leadership from the top, servant leadership from the top, leadership that was prepared to make the sacrifice even of life. The Mandela generation who were prepared to go freedom. And they didn't do it because they wanted to enrich themselves. They did it because they believed people who made the freedom. It was people who stood up and said, we had the only generation capable of making changes and improving governance is those that are under, otherwise it's too late. And today you are the majority. What is it you want? What is the Africa you want? I lost you there.
Yes, we can just continue. So you were talking about, yeah, what is it that young people want? They are the majority.
I think the real question about the future is, what does it mean to be African? What is the Africa you want? You, the young people. Because if 60% of the 1.3 billion people in Africa are under 25, then the future is yours. And the future is now, not later or tomorrow. And I think Africa is at a crossroads now where we need your generation to find its dream, its inspiration, its struggle, its destiny. And then for people like myself who are elders to support you, to make the Africa we can all be proud of. Not the Africa where you want to be a poor photocopy of some Western model or Eastern model or Northern model or European model. What does it mean to be African? Beyond the shadow of the last 500 years of colonialization, of, of slavery, of apartheid, of economic brutalization. What does it mean to be African? And when you go back to that, beyond the 500 years, you will find there's deep wisdom there, indigenous wisdom. There were civilizations. It was the cradle of humanity. The most important technologies of humanity came out of Africa: fire, language, music, agriculture, the use of metal. The communication with your ancestors is a technology that this technology has still not understood. So, where is that great spirit of ancestral wisdom? Are you ashamed of it? And you want to be a poor photocopy of something else? What is the health and the medicine that we had? People lived and they had civilizations and they had health and they had education and they sat under the baobab tree and they sorted out all the challenges. They didn't have a police force and an army and a jail. They didn't have laws. They saw themselves as part of nature, not apart from nature. When they when the Khoisan saw an eland, it was a token spirit. When they saw a forest, they didn't see timber to be cut down to make money. They saw timber and they looked at the forest and they said, there's the spirit of the forest. You think we didn't have medicine? We had more medicine then than you have today in all of Western pharmacology. And so we abandon who we are and we try to be someone else. And that is our failure. I'm not saying we shouldn't learn from everyone else. But first, the question is, who am I? Why am I here? What does it mean to be human? How do I look at myself as an African, which is the cradle of humanity, and see how do I evolve my consciousness so that we can live in peace and harmony and joy and happiness instead of conflict and poverty and inequality and arrogance. That's as a generation. And I'll be there behind you.
Yes, so we want a prosperous Africa. We had all this technology, innovation that was coming out of Africa. And of course, you talk about medicines, the traditional systems of knowledge. And we gave all of that away, starting with slave trade when we sold our own people. And of course, came colonialism and ended up with colonial masters controlling nearly every aspect of the African economy, controlling access to education, to opportunities. And now we have a system where many people feel that after independence, the colonial elites were replaced by the African elites, and they are not interested in using national resources for economic development, but simply to maintain their power. And for our generation, it's a problem of participation, how you get involved in changing those aspects of our governance without being brutalized, and all the things that happen when young people try to get involved. So how can elders support this generation to participate and bring the resources that we can bring to the table to make that transformation happen?
You know, the most exciting time to be alive is now, on 200,000 years. And in the last 150 years, we've brought our beautiful mother almost to its knees. But it's been here. It's not going anywhere. The real question is, do we want to be here as human beings? Because there's been 5 extinctions already where 75% of life has been wiped out on the planet. The last time is with the dinosaurs. Okay, so what is to be done is the question. If I look back in my own personal journey, I was 4 years old when we were evicted from our house because we're the wrong color on the wrong side of the street. Made me very angry. And that anger was really hurting myself to a point where I started to feel that I was inferior to white people. Young people who haven't lived in apartheid don't understand the mental and the psychological trauma of apartheid and how it affected your parents and your grandparents and etc. So we must never minimize that because that's as real. Psychological trauma, emotional trauma is as real. It was Steve Biko who inspired. I was 15 years old. I went to listen to him and he said, you have nothing to lose but your chains because the mind of the oppressed is the main weapon in the hands of the oppressor. The wonderful thing about it is it didn't have Zoom and PowerPoint presentations and Twitter and Facebook, focused hard. And he wasn't looking at how many what he spoke. He was a true leader. And he inspired us. He gave us a direction. He didn't give us business plan. So we didn't, as we started to work towards building towards 1976 and that exploded, we just went and did it. Didn't tell us what to do. We just saw there's right and there's wrong, and we should take a stand. So I don't understand why you need to think about what you have to do. Just do what you have to do. And you'll find that you'll find other people believing the same thing and other people believing the same thing.
Yeah.
The only advice I give you is the only leader you really need to follow is the leader inside your heart. Because there are many demagogues out there. What does an economy mean? How do we stop fossil fuels? How do we look at Africa and say we have 60% of the remaining arable land in the world? Countries and big corporates coming to plunder and grab our land. But we have hunger. 250 million people go to bed hungry in sub-Saharan Africa. And you talk to women who produce 90% of our food in Africa, and you ask them, why are we not producing food? And they'll tell you, we don't own land. We don't have money to set up a seed bank, a nursery, to have irrigation. The middlemen steal the profit of our food. So can't we solve that? We could make Africa the breadbasket of the world, and we could improve the lives of women. And when you improve incomes and lives of women, they invest it in their children's health and their children's education. They don't go and sit in the shebeen and drink. How do we deal with patriarchy, which is a curse? And if you go beyond colonization, you'll find matriarchal societies in Africa. There wasn't the idea that men will decide everything in the world we have. Look at the violence against women or children or against Mother Earth. And that's why we need women like you who are strong, who are nurturing, who want an economy. If you look at Africa, why should we have fossil fuels and oil and gas and nuclear when we have 300 days of sunshine? And the cost of solar today is less than the cost of coal or nuclearity. So why can't we learn from the telecommunications strategy we had, where we failed in that to build the manufacturing capacity, to produce the equipment and the phones and the routers and whatever is needed for telecommunications? As we're starting to grow, create tens of thousands of jobs in Africa. If we had imagination and if our elites were not captured by vested interest around the world, it comes back to how will we build gender? Well, it's your generation that has to do that. And you have to question everyone and you have to question everything. And while you can do it with respect, don't believe what people say to you. Believe what you think is right. And we all want to see.
the challenge that I do is really how we move past the capture, the middleman. When we go out there and we want to be involved, we want a seat at the table. We don't get a seat at the table. The people who get a seat at the table are the people coming from USID in Washington, people coming from Geneva. The work that we do at Medicines for Africa, we feel, we've been there and, said we have solutions, we have ideas, but you don't even get a foot, you don't get in the room, because everybody in that room who is allowed in that room is coming from elsewhere. And you think, I am from here. Why can't I sit at the table and be part of this conversation? So that is part of the challenge I think that the youth is facing right now today in trying to bring the change that we think is needed. And so it brings us to the question whether it's going to ever be possible to move past that dynamic that is coming from colonialism, where outside governments and companies simply pay our elites to get access to a seat at the table, to resources, basically, and are given a blank check to extract as much as they wish. And the people are seeing no benefits from all of these resources that actually should be owned by the people. So how do we get a seat at the table? How do we participate and bring the ideas that we have?
You know, why do you want a seat at the table? Whose table is it? Even if you have a seat at the table, they're still going to screw us. So why do we need a table? If you go to real Africa, beyond past 500 years, we sat on the ground and we sat in a circle and we sat under the baobab tree. So why go into a terrain where they control everything? Now, the only way you can change the table is if you organize. I mean, if I go back to the late 60s and early 70s, I mean, we were on the street, we organized, and they still smashed us in 1976. But then we realized that no, when we looked behind us as students, we saw we had left behind the workers and we left behind the parents and the women and the grandmothers. So we went back and we organized. And no one gave us a free t shirt or gave us money to go and organize. We just did it. So the question is, why don't you do it? There is discontent and there's legitimate grievances our people have. All the grievances that have you have said to me now are legitimate. So why do we allow a few people to control that? So I think that the question I can say to you is go back and organize, 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 or you will starve because they will strangle the oxygen of our continent. So the issue really is it's not about fiddling with the status quo. The status quo is not working. What is something new we have to create that brings human well being and health? Two-thirds of the disease burden we face today is caused by diet, the junk food that we are eating, the empty calories that are in the food because they've poisoned the soil and they've destroyed the soil, which is like a living being. Go back to our elders, they look at the soil and they'll say, this is us. We have a sacred relationship with the soil. But you have a Western chemical driven, industrialized system of agriculture that puts poison into the soil. The chemicals that come out and we put into the soil today is the same as the chemicals that was used to make bombs in the Second World War. Now, if you go back to what it means to be African and what is African wisdom, the soil is sacred. The river is sacred. The forest is sacred. We pay respect to it because it gives us life. We are the soil because the soil and everything that lives in the topsoil gives the food, the seeds we plant, the crops we grow, the nutrients that makes us live. So how do we respect that? And if you start to look at it, the way of using the model, like sort of Western model of exploitation, destroys nature, destroys the very earth that we are part of. And that's why when you think about health and well being, Africa has a lot to offer. If you go to the traditional indigenous plant medicines that we use, you know, right from impepu, an African sage, which we use to talk to the ancestors, or right to thousands of plants that tackle many of the diseases we get. But we've become lazy. We've become sometimes ashamed of who we are. So the way, you know, the way out to a new Africa that respects its wisdom, respects its traditions, is the way in. And then we'll understand how interconnected we are with everything, with the tree, with the land, with the bird, with the bees, with other human beings and other species. And then we will find we'll start to heal the wound that we carry, the wound of humanity, the wound that was caused by colonization, that's caused by slavery, that's caused by our addiction to just buying and buying and buying, even if it's going to destroy the world for our future, for our children and grandchildren. So we are running out of time, and we don't have time now to entertain the type of protocols and the type of political correctness that keep us trapped in this poverty and in this violence. We need to heal it within ourselves, heal it between ourselves, heal it in terms of us understanding that every culture, every language, every traditional view has its right. And it's only by weaving all of that together that we come to the solutions for how humanity needs to live. And that's a great contribution that Africa can make to the world. When we look at it, it's not just about health, it's about answering the question, what does it mean to be human?
So it's really going back to the basics. So we don't need a table. We can do away with the table. We don't have to try to change from the same system that is creating the same problems. But how do we protect or ensure that the natural resources, the soil that you're talking about, the trees, the land, the traditional medicines that we constantly give away for others to go and exploit and make money from. How do we make sure all those natural resources, we have appropriate custody of them to use them to protect the well-being of this current generation and hold them in trust for the generations, our kids who are coming in the future? How can you operate outside of that system and be able to change all of that when the rules are being made somewhere else and you're not a part of that?
You know, the only example I can give you is now what's happening in the Okavango basin. A Canadian oil company is drilling for oil. The Namibian and Botswana governments have given them a license to drill for oil and gas in an area 2.5 million hectares. They were making the same promises that were made in the Niger Delta to people then in the 1950s. And today, if you go to the Niger Delta, which I have, it's chaos. They've destroyed the land because it's poisoned with oil. The lakes, the fish have died. People are living in absolute poverty. Violence has increased. Social cohesion has broken. And none of the promises that were made have been delivered on 70 years later. Making the same promises in the Okavango and Kavango. Now, who's going to stop that? The only people capable of stopping that are the people who live there in those communities. And so the role of people like yourselves is to provide them with proper information, knowledge, similar to how we organize trade unions. Workers were organized on the basis of what are our rights as human beings, as workers, irrespective of apartheid. Our rights to a living wage, our rights to health and safety, our rights to make sure that women are not fired when they fell pregnant. All these are rights that we organized, we united people, we built power, and we negotiated. the question is really go back to the ground. I know that a big battle that we're facing is on this digital media. And yes, it is a battleground, but you also have to do it in the physical realm. You have to go there. I went and I stood outside factories from 3:30 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night to catch each shift. I didn't complain. No one gave me money. I had to hitchhike. And so I was a volunteer. Millions of us didn't ask for, you need to pay me to go and organize workers in the factory. No, we did it because if you have to ask yourself now, what is the right thing?